Good evening. I'd like to call to order this special town council meeting for Wednesday, May 22nd, 2019. Please rise for a moment of silence. At the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Fishbein, Laughlin,
Here.
Letourneau,
Here.
Marone,
Here.
It happened quietly earlier
Morgenstein,
today.
Shortell,
Here.
Testa,
Here.
Zandri, and Chairman Cervoni.
Here. With 6, we have a quorum. This being specially noticed, there were scheduling conflicts to manage. So tonight's meeting is to conduct a public hearing and consider an ordinance, and I will read the title shortly. And we're going to go right into it. I hereby convene the public hearing for the $60 million appropriation and bond authorization for the water pollution control facility improvements. The ordinance, which is the subject of this public hearing, is available to the public and may be obtained at this meeting from the town clerk. Is there a motion and a second to read the title of the proposed ordinance and to waive the reading of the remainder of the ordinance incorporating its full text into the minutes of this meeting? So moved. Moved by Laughlin, seconded by Letourneau. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Motion passes. Title of the ordinance. An ordinance appropriating $60 million for the planning, acquisition, and construction of a tertiary treatment process for the phosphorus removal and other improvements to the Wallingford Water Pollution Control Facility, and authorizing the issue of $60 million bonds of the town to meet said appropriation, and pending the issuance thereof, the making of temporary borrowings for such purpose. With that, I open the public hearing. Actually, before we take commentary from the public, can we have staff at the table to tell us where we are on the road and how we got here?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman. Should we introduce ourselves?
Please.
For the record. Richard Hendershot, the Director of Public Utilities.
Neil Amwick, General Manager for the Wallingford Water and Sewer Divisions.
William Phelan, Office Manager, Water and Sewer Division.
Thank you.
With your indulgence, I think what we'd like to do is make a brief presentation. Mr. Amwick will conduct that. You can ask us questions about the project while we make that presentation. It'll be based on the materials that you have in front of you. And with that, I'll just pass it over to Mr. Amwick.
Please do. Thank you.
Good evening. So just to review the proposed improvements at the wastewater treatment plant, we have a new anaerobic tank, a relocated intermediate pump station, 2 secondary settling tanks, a secondary pump station, our new tertiary phosphorus building, new UV disinfection, and new post-aeration, along with standby generation. So that is the along with some other site work and extensive electrical upgrades as well.
So that's the real Cliff Notes version of what's going to be done.
Correct. I mean, we've had several workshops. I can go into any of the specific components thereof.
Yep. And I wanted the public to have the foundation to the extent that there is anyone here who might want to comment. And so with that, the public hearing is open. If there is comment from the public, please come forward. Please name and address for the record, please, when you get to the microphone.
Mansfield. I live on 94 Ridgeland Circle. And when I saw the notice of this meeting, I looked at it and I said, 60 million, that's 6 with 7 zeros and a couple of commas after it. That's a lot of money. To get rid of some phosphorus is what I didn't understand all the other improvements that are going on. But how much phosphorus do we have, really? I mean, I know the state has told us we have to get rid of this, but...
Neil, would you like to address that?
Sure. So the mayor has my charts, but I'll try to remember. So the phosphorus removal season is April 1 to October 31st, and currently our limit is 0.70 milligrams per liter. What we need to go down to is at our design flow rate of 8 million gallons a day is 0.13 milligrams per liter, but that equates to a mass balance of 8.9 pounds per day of phosphorus is what our limit is. So anything over that limit we need to remove. In April, between April 1 and April 30, 2019, our influent phosphorus limit was about 44.5 pounds per day.
So we're paying $60 million to get rid of 4 pounds of phosphorus.
Well, we would go from 44.5 down to 8.9 pounds per day. So then you'd multiply that by 30.
Okay. It's an awful lot of money for that many pounds. Can we sell the phosphorus after we get it out of there?
No, it basically turns into a biomass, which we haul off site and then is incinerated.
Okay, very good. $60 million is going to add up more to my water bill again, and it's just everything keeps going up, and it's getting kind of ridiculous, I think. Thank you.
Ms. Tata?
Thank you. Christina Tata, 751 North Farms Road. I agree, $60 million seems like a huge amount of money, considering every budget season, the council sits up there and debates $30,000 for fireworks and other $1,000 items, and now we have $60 million. And I haven't heard from anybody that anyone specifically wants this or feels it's necessary. I understand there are upgrades to the plant that maybe are necessary, but the phosphorus aspect, which is, I believe, a state mandate, is a huge portion of this, and I haven't really seen. I know the mayor's office said they've been fighting this and seeing if we can get out of it, but so far it looks like that's not going that way. So I'm just wondering if the council does not approve this tonight, if the bonding is not approved, what would happen? Is that potentially a chance for us to save some money to get out of this? What procedurally happens if the council says that we will not spend the $60 million?
Mayor?
I can help with the answer on that. I think, from what I'm told, it's a $25,000 a day fine. That rapidly accumulates. Probably in 6 or 7 years, you're at $60 million. So we have sent a letter to the governor requesting what's called a variance from EPA. The state of Connecticut would have to issue or request that variance. I haven't heard anything from the governor's office at this point, but I personally am very much opposed to this project. I could not recommend that we do not move forward, given the potential for a serious fine.
Thank you, and I do understand also there's a grant at play here, so I know time is of the essence, but I would just ask maybe the council or anybody, I know we have a state rep also on the council, if we could maybe look at this at the state level or see if, somehow we could try to maybe save at least a good portion of this. That would really help the ratepayers. Thank you.
So Mayor, you just pointed out this is an EPA mandate, so this is a federal mandate. Is that correct?
EPA requires it, but DEEP of the state of Connecticut is implementing it. Whether they would be able to, on their own, request further time. Obviously, if DEEP at the state level requested through the governor and variance were requested, I would think that that might be successful, but DEEP is not requesting that. I don't know whether the governor would try to over their objection, but generally, it's implementation of a federal law.
Right, and if we're non-compliant, we're looking at $25,000 a day in fines, accumulating for every day that we're not in compliance. Are there any other comments from the public? If not, then I call the public hearing closed, and I need a motion on the ordinance.
I move we pass the ordinance as proposed.
Attorney Fozzie, is that sufficient to refer? Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Discussion on the council. Councilor Marone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So this is a topic that we've talked about ad nauseum for several years. And I think we all knew that this was coming. So I guess my only question is, how is it that it came to tonight with a special meeting with the Batman symbol in the sky, having it, on a Wednesday night out of schedule? We had a meeting 8 days ago and we have one in 6 days again. So I guess I'm trying to understand what the sense of urgency is to have a special meeting to get past this ordinance. And my concern is that anytime we have a special meeting, you have fewer members of the public. It seems a little less democratic to me. So perhaps you can help enlighten me.
Certainly. You want to go?
Yeah, Councilman, this was originally going to be on your agenda for next week. These gentlemen that you see in front of you, 3 commissioners in the audience, are under a very, very strict deadline. Neil can provide the details of these. As I thought one day, speaking with Neil and Mr. Hendershot, and Mr. Amwake, Mr. Phelan, and the mayor, I said, why don't we if we can schedule the council to have a special meeting on this, bump it up a week, because these guys are going to need every minute that they can get. Because if we don't meet certain specific deadlines established by the state of Connecticut to get every T crossed, every I dotted, and everything up to Hartford, there are serious ramifications as far as potential serious ramifications that put either grant and or some of the loan funds at risk. So I said, the way that it was coming down now, the way that we need to have an ordinance, have a cooling off period for possible petition, et cetera, that we need to move on this. Even if we gain a week's time, they can get that thing up there. That was my first reason. The second reason actually came to me a little bit later when Mr. Amwake told me that there's 4 or 5 other communities in the hopper all going to Hartford at around the same date and time. They're all going to meet the deadline probably the day or the day before. I've dealt with Hartford on many things for many clients many, many moons ago. The earlier you get that stuff in, the better off you are. And so if it helps us beat 5 or 6, now that's not going to say that they're going to accept things and be happy with things. I'm not suggesting that. But the earlier that these folks can get this stuff up to Hartford, the better off we are. That's why it was sort of my idea that I floated. Why don't we ask Chairman Cervoni and you folks, the 9 of you, if you could get to a meeting a week earlier. That's all.
On that, Mr. Bose, I love the idea of giving them more time. This is something we've been talking about for years, so I'm just not sure why. We've had 8 regular council meetings up to this point. I'm not sure why now now we need to save time, this week, when we could have voted on this last year, but it had the same result. I mean, it's sort of a fait accompli, because I know we've sort of been fighting the phosphorus thing, but we knew it was coming. We're like the last community to fall, the last domino to fall, so to speak. So I'm not sure why everything is so last minute.
There's another complication, and just recently, this ordinance was changed because the state of Connecticut, through DEP, tells us they don't have the money. Previously, we wouldn't be doing this, I don't believe, until after we would not be paying the cost from day one. The state of Connecticut would be. It was a different kind of agreement. Now that the state indicates and the governor has put a hold on any bonding, they have no money. So the result of that is this ordinance allows us to do all of the funding for $60 million. Completely different than the previous scenario where we would enter into a loan agreement, and that agreement that would be, our obligation to pay on that would be after basically substantial or complete construction was completed. Now we are fronting the money for construction, hopefully to be reimbursed. And originally it was 50%, if you recall, 50%. Well, the total cost is 60 million. The amount of money we will receive, should the grants be approved ultimately, is 20 million. Sounds like more a third to me, not 50%. So there's a lot of change that is going on with this due to the uncertainties at the state level, as well as other factors which the utility probably is more aware of than I am. But it's very frustrating because you're told to get into a project, and this is not public health or safety. To my knowledge, you might have some very remote indirect effect to public health, but it is not public health or safety. So we will spend $60 million having been promised 50%. We don't get the 50%, which means if this goes through as it is, I spoke about earlier, it would be, with the grant from the state, it would have been $150 for the average residential user and up to $4,000 for a commercial industrial. That will be higher if the grant never comes through. Because we will pay, and I think if instead of a 2% loan, we're at a 3.5%, that would be an additional $6 million in interest payments, plus the 20 million, which would be our money, have to be borrowed rather than coming from the state of Connecticut. So there's serious financial consequences to this. But some of the effort right now is to meet the adjustments that have to occur as a result of the state not coming through with what it indicated were incentives for us to enter into this project.
So just so I'm clear.
Is your mic on?
Thank you. Just so I'm clear, by waiting then, or by not having started the project a year ago, we potentially lost some of the state grant, is what I'm hearing?
No, the reason the state is not providing the money is because they don't have the money.
I understand.
The governor is not borrowing money. Whenever you would start this, the governor would have to okay bonding. So we couldn't have started it a year ago. We didn't have a design. We were in the midst of design.
So other municipalities that started this project, say, a year or 2 years ago, did they receive the 50% reimbursement?
I want to jump in here.
Please.
So Public Act 16-57, which was passed in May 2016, provides for 3 buckets of grant money. 11 communities in the state of Connecticut qualified for this special grant funding. Everything related to tertiary phosphorus upgrades is eligible for a 50% grant. Everything that's associated with nitrogen or nutrient upgrade is available for 30%. Everything else is available for 20%. So then you come up with a weighted average.
Okay.
So we never expected to get the full 50%. Everything we're doing on the project is not phosphorus related. If we were not one of the 11 communities in Connecticut, we would only qualify for a 30% phosphorus grant. In order to qualify for this special grant funding at the 50% level, we have to be under contract with our contractor by June 30th, 2019. June 30th, 2019 is a Sunday. That backs it up to June 28th, 2019. The town of Wallingford has a 21-day funding ordinance wait period. So you start with the calendar, it's included in your packet given to you this evening as well as emailed last week. You start counting back those days. Wallingford has a policy where we do not have our funding ordinance until we know what the contractor bids. Why should we tip our hands as far as what the contractor bids? One of our goals was to lengthen out our bidding period as long as we could. So you get a longer bidding period, contractors tend to sharpen their prices. So we didn't open the bids until May 7th. It is now 22nd. Within 14 days, we've gone from bid opening, bid evaluation, the Public Utilities Commission recommended to the town council, and then here we are tonight. So to go back to your original question, Councilor, excuse me, it really was a function of the calendar and the calendars on the day. What we are working against is this June 28th, 2019 funding. Public Act is pretty clear. If we don't have a signed contract by that date, the 50% grant funding goes away for phosphorus and it immediately goes to 30%.
Okay, I really appreciate the clarification.
So what you do is you get a grant, you basically get a grant, you get a weighted grant percentage. Okay, let's just call it 35 just for back of the napkin. The other 65% then goes to a 2% 20-year loan. So a lot of people are attracted to the grant money. But what we really need to look at is that 2% over 20 years. Current bond rates are about 3.5%. Mr. Phelan ran the numbers yesterday. It's about a $6 million difference on the loan as well. What the mayor's talking about is the Clean Water Fund up at the state capitol is empty right now. So we have two different paths. We have to be under contract by June 28th, but yet there's no Clean Water Fund money. That we're waiting for the governor to hold his bond commission meetings. Normally, once you get into construction, you get to a point where the state is basically paying the contractor vis-a-vis directly for you because the Clean Water Fund monies are there. You have a Clean Water Fund agreement. Without any Clean Water Fund monies available, the town of Wallingford, they may need to have these short-term construction costs. Our funding ordinance is written so that would cover our funding ordinance for the 33-month, 32-month construction period. How it traditionally works is at the end of the construction period, 30 to 90 days after you end the construction period, you have what's called a closing with the DEP. At that point, DEP has paid out 100% of the monies. They basically credit you for your grant percentage, and then you enter into this 2% 20-year loan for the remaining portion. With no money in the Clean Water Fund bank account per se, town of Wallingford, through our funding ordinance, needs to be able to cover those costs during construction until the capital decides to have a bond commission meeting. Did I capture that right, gentlemen?
So how long has the Clean Water Fund been empty?
Right now the grant money's empty and they ran out of, so they emptied the grant money. Vernon, as Mr. Bose talked about, was the first one in. They used the remainder of the grant money. They have a partial grant funding and there's some loan money remaining. Marion is in the same situation as Wallingford. Danbury is in the same situation as Wallingford. Ridgefield is in the same situation as Wallingford, and Vernon only has partial funding at this point.
Okay.
So all five communities basically need the ability to have short-term borrowing.
So I understand the function. I really appreciate the explanation. I guess to go back to my original question, would it have been possible to go through this whole process a year ago or 2 years ago?
No,
Because
we weren't ready to do so. The facility plan hadn't been done, a design hadn't been done. So, no, at this point, 2 years ago, we just got started at this effort.
In March of 2017, I was in front of the council asking for permission to do a quality-based selection to start the facility plan.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Testa?
Thank you. I bought a Lego wastewater treatment plant set.
I did not get that one.
And I am thrilled to say that is exactly as you described it earlier. With all that stuff you said that we didn't understand. All kidding aside, can you clarify for me, when you say tertiary phosphorus, is that a chemical explanation or is it a procedural, a process reference, the tertiary part?
So there's actually different methodologies for tertiary phosphorus treatment. As part of the facility plan at the Wallingford Water Pollution Control Facility, we had a pilot with 3 different technologies. We ended up going with a ballasted flocculation technology. So basically what we do is the wastewater comes in, we add a sand, it's a special sand, we add a polymer, we rapid mix it, we slow mix it, then the sand and the polymer falls out, then we can recycle the sand and the phosphorus becomes a biomass sludge. Compare that to Meriden, we know is going with a deep sand filter situation, which is more of a physical process. So we tested 3 different technologies head to head. It was a 3-week piloting process. And then we really looked at what's the best for Wallingford. Don't forget, the Wallingford wastewater treatment plant is unique in that we have a rotating biological contractors. So we have a fixed film process, which is different than an activated sludge process, which the majority of wastewater treatment plants use. And I realize I've just lost about the majority of you. So I apologize. Sorry.
I actually got all that, but that's okay. Can you estimate for us, or provide an estimate as to how much of the $60 million expense expected is related directly to the compliance with the phosphorus mandate? And how much is for work that we have known we needed to do and we need to do to upgrade our facility to meet need and demand?
So I cannot at this point for 2 reasons. So number 1 is when the contractors bid, we had a total of 9 or 10 bid items. We gave them 8 of them, and we basically asked for build the upgrades as we've designed it. It was 1 bid item. So until we get the contractors' schedule of values, I cannot answer that question.
Is it safe to say that these laws requiring removal of phosphate to lower levels are not costing us $60 million?
Because Wallingford started our facility plan and our design late, this project is stripped down to simply what we need to do to accomplish our phosphorus. So the anaerobic tank that will be parallel to the primary tank allows us some biological and chemical greater breakdown. We're adding 2 additional settling tanks. Our loading rates at our settling tanks for our solids are too high right now, and the way the hydraulic grade line, the way the hydraulics work, we need to put a new secondary pump station in to pump up to the tertiary phosphorus treatment. Our UV currently floods when the Quinnipiac River comes up. So it's all associated with phosphorus, and that will be rolled into the weighted average. But at this point, it's hard to really break down. I don't have the schedule of values.
And let me make a comment. This industry is relatively new to me, but I have been to the plant. I've spent a lot of time with Neil and his staff as they've held my hand and brought me along. It's a complicated and integrated process to say this is only because it does phosphorus is nearly impossible to do, because all of the wastewater goes through all of the plant and receives all of the treatment. And that's the best way I can explain it. It is one massive chemical and biological science experiment that works 24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
But in order to get our tertiary phosphorus treatment to the levels that we need, part of it is we need to prepare the wastewater as best we can prior to it reaches that tertiary phosphorus building. So similar to a Lego, you just can't plug in that last piece and it works. You really need to look upstream. So when we look upstream and we're adding an anaerobic tank, when we're adding 2 new secondary settling tanks, it helps us knock down the phosphorus limits before we get to the tertiary phosphorus treatment. You really have a maximum level of phosphorus that can go through those tertiary phosphorus treatment facilities. You just can't put a slug in there. It's basically like a good recipe. You want to start with good ingredients. Here the ingredient is wastewater.
We have talked for a long time about the need to upgrade the facility in general. Are you suggesting or saying that some of the original plans or intentions to do that have been scaled down due to the expectation that the reimbursement rates are now going to be different than we expected 2 years ago or a year ago?
No.
Is that what I heard?
No, that is not the case. So because the June 28th, 2019 funding deadline for the 50% grant on the phosphorus related items, there is we've always termed it excuse me. We've always termed it a phase 2. We've mentioned in the previous workshops, but to that phase 2, there's been 7 other distinct mini phases behind that take us beyond 2030. So because of the strict timeline we had to get through design, bidding, and award, there are some other items that eventually will need to be tackled at the wastewater treatment plant that we just couldn't roll into this project, such as the sludge digesters.
But there was a time when that was intended to all be done at once.
Here in Wallingford, that never was on the table.
No? Okay.
No, for this project. There are other municipalities, is part of their phosphorus, I know have undertaken a much more comprehensive overhaul of their wastewater treatment plant.
Okay. I now want to, as gracefully as I can, address the questions Mr. Marone brought up. And in total frankness and honesty, I believe, I forgot your question specifically, but we are where we are because we dug, when I say we, I mean the town, dug our heels in and opposed this on principle. And I am fully confident that we would not be in a situation right now if we accepted what we knew was going to happen 2 or 3 years ago and got started on this. Now, I understand Mr. Andershott's answer. That was well done, sir. That, well, we couldn't begin the design except for a year or 2 ago. That was delayed. So none of this is at the feet of the people in front of us today, or even the PUC. We, and I'm going to go right at the administration, we would not accept that this was coming. And we kept saying, we're not going to go along with this. And you will find that this project is going to cost us a hell of a lot more money because of that stubbornness. If we miss deadlines, it's not because you didn't start designing early. You didn't start designing early enough because you were told not to. And I'm sorry,
I understand,
but now I am very upset about this.
Well,
I know what's happening.
You've made that clear.
What?
You've made it clear that you're upset about
and I said this a while back. We knew this was coming. Now all of a sudden we find out, well, we missed this deadline, and that's fine. And all these other communities jumped in, but we can't say, oh, now the state doesn't have any money, we're going to blame it on the state. The big bad state is putting on these requirements that aren't necessary. I'm not even going to get into the scientific necessity of this stuff. Don't say it's not a matter of health and safety. No, it's not arsenic in our water, but it is the health of the water, the large water systems that our fish grow in. It does have a health and safety effect. This isn't just arbitrary, ridiculous stuff that crazy tree huggers put into office. I know what people want to say. This has been coming for a long time. Phosphorus in the water is a problem, and it leads to a lot of problems. We can fight about it, the limits, we can fight about this, but we knew it was coming. And now that we find out it could cost us $10, $20, $30 million, we better look at why. And it's not because the state said we have to do it, and the state's out of money, and we're not going to get our money back. I'm very frustrated about this. Thank you. I'm sorry if I lost my temper. Oh, no, I'm not sorry. I lost my temper.
Mayor?
Yeah, I can categorically state I have never told the utilities not to move ahead with this. That's just never occurred. Secondly, there is no doubt about it, it is not a human health and safety issue. If it were that there's too much phosphorus in the water for human consumption, there would be something that would have been mandated long before this. It's a nice idea to make the water cleaner, clean it up of nutrients, encourage aquatic life. That's a great idea. But the people who come up with that idea at the state and federal level should come up with the money to fund it. They don't. We've had other grant programs where they promise 40%, 50%, and when they get through, including education building projects, where you're told it's going to be X percent. We're told, the last education project, we were supposed to get 50 or 52%. We ended up with 47%. By the time they finish with all the eligible and ineligible, we get less money. And this is the same pattern here. But the town of Wallingford has acted responsibly. We're not happy with it, at least I'm not. I think the people who come up with these ideas should fund them, but they don't. They don't have the money at the state level, and they don't fund it from the federal level. In the 1990s, 95% of sewer plant improvements were funded by federal government. That money is no longer there. Why? We all know why. There's no money at those levels, or at least far less than there used to be, but they don't change their mandates. Their mandates remain the same, and you end up with the mandates landing on the people and businesses of the communities. So the 50% phosphorus grant was what would be eligible for that grant. That's the way the state interprets it, although they will say there was a 50% grant. It was never going to be 50% of the cost, because they never calculate grants that really represent that percentage of the total cost.
I'll simply say that to claim that they should put up the money to fund this, they had, and we missed it.
Councilor Letourneau.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, on the grant money, I think the last time we talked about this, Representative Mashinsky was here, and she was saying that there were specific deadlines that had to be met in order to be eligible for the grant money. And I forget what the dates were, but it was, I know on your part, it was moving along and you were going to make those deadlines. There wasn't a problem, and you'd have to, I remember, Neil, you talking about you're going to have to do a little double time, but you'll make the dates. So what I'm hearing tonight is you've made the dates, you did everything that you were supposed to do, but then all of a sudden, well, she's not here tonight, but it sounds like now the grant money's gone, that we're not going to get the grant money. And I remember her standing there and saying that, you know, she fought every day, every week for this, because there were other communities standing in line waiting for this. And I think it was Hartford, what is that, the water authority up there was really trying to nip at this money. And I'm not sure if it was the grant money or the estimated or the state loan money, but it was one of the pools of money, and I'm pretty sure it was the grants. But here we are tonight. You guys did everything you're supposed to do, and now we're hearing there's a good chance we're not going to get the grant money. So I wish there was a state representative here, because where I'm disappointed, and I know the frustration of my fellow councilors. Well, I'm frustrated too, because where did it go? Who's got it? It had to go someplace. If the state took it and spent it on other projects, shame on them. If they gave it to other towns before us, well, that's something else to take a look at. But just to have that money evaporate, I don't get it. The state loan the estimated state loan of $38 million. Mayor, what was that? Was that a separate pool of money that we could have tapped, you know, that was available at one time that is not available now, or?
My understanding is every year the state of Connecticut authorizes bonding, the bond commission. So it's not that there was one fund of money and it lasts over a lengthy period of time. They bond, they borrow the money. So thus far this year, the governor has not allowed a meeting of the bond commission because he says the state needs to be on a debt diet. The result is that DEEP is depending upon that bond authorization to then authorize grants towns that Neil mentioned, including Wallingford, that's where the funding would come from. But the bond commission can't meet because they're in the midst of battles over the budget, et cetera.
Right, I understand
So
that.
I don't think there was one sum of money that was sitting there that was enough to handle. It's a year-by-year basis, and whoever is at a point where work will commence and you initiate the project in that year during the bond commission approval, the money then is available. So, it's fallen into this budget battle, and we wait. Now, I think the commission are expecting that at some point the money will be approved. That's what Deep says. They're just waiting for the bond commission to meet, and then the money will be available. The change for us here is that we can't report tonight that we're only going to have a smaller amount of money shouldering that for the businesses and residents in town. Our authorization is for $60 million, because at this point, we need to enter into a contract. We need all of that authorized to enter into the contract with the bidder.
So when we move this forward tonight, it'll be just like any of the other bonding that we do. We're going to authorize 60 million. That does not mean we are spending 60 million. The potential is there to spend 60 million. If we get nothing from the state, we're going to be on the hook for 60 million. But, so what we can do is, I guess through your office, Mr. Bose, that you'll issue as needed the bonding, and we'll just keep our fingers crossed that something will come through from the state.
Yeah, as I stated at to the PUC commissioners last week, two very important factors that we have to really weigh heavily, and we don't have them tonight, and we won't for a while, but it's number one is the expected cash outflow schedule from our folks, both our consultants primarily, and the second being how is the state gonna fund this temporarily as we go along? Is it going to be a drawdown type of situation, or is it going to be something that we were originally told would be the state would be actually paying the contractor, and then at the end of the contract, when everything is said and done, and hopefully everybody's happy and the project has worked successfully, there is a closing at which time the computations are presented, and I don't know if they're appealed or not, but at that point in time, you really find the finality of what is granted versus what is loaned. And hopefully that makes up the whole $60 million. If it doesn't, then we might have to tap into this authorization to do so. But it's my hope that we wouldn't have to permanently borrow anything. Now, that's not going to happen because, as Mr. Amwake says, there's no cash supposedly in the fund to do these things, to pay the contractors for several municipalities that are going to be going very soon. But, so there may be some temporary issues, some notes. And what you said is accurate. And then from here on in, we'd have to check and see when we issue those notes, when they're coming due, whether to renew them, whether to pay them off with monies that we might get from the state. It all depends.
Okay, so just one more quick thing. So the estimated state loan was $38 million. So I'm going to work with that $38 million state loan. What was the interest rate on something like that?
The interest rate by statute, and I asked Neil to correct me if I'm wrong, is 2% per year.
Okay.
For 20, is it 20-year maximum? Or Attorney Joe Fossi? Yeah.
And how does that weigh against if we didn't take their loan but bonded it?
Very favorably versus current rates. 2% per year is very good.
Okay.
We would not
get
that.
that through the bonding?
With bonds, no, we would not.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you. I'm just frustrated also with this, so. All right, thank you.
Councilor Shortell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a lot of these, I've written a lot of stuff down and I feel like it's already been answered, so I'm just going to go through a few just to make sure I have it straight. I think the big question I had was about what Councilor Testa asked in terms of, when you break this down, how much of this is due to the phosphorus versus just upgrades we'd have to do anyway at some point. I'm trying to find silver lining, that, well, at some point, we'd have to upgrade some of these tanks and equipment anyway, but I guess from what you're saying before, it's hard at this point to really quantify that. I mean,
everything we have proposed in the current upgrades relates back to phosphorus. So anaerobic tank, preparing our wastewater, that's a biological and chemical tank. Secondary settling tank, our loading rate with only 4 tanks, basically how much solids we have in per gallon of water, is too high. It's above wastewater standards. That's an exciting book to read when you can't sleep. We then have to go, so then our tertiary phosphorus building is up gradient. We need to pump up to it. It goes from tertiary phosphorus down to UV, down to post-aeration. UV currently floods. We need a new gravity thickener because we're creating bigger biomass. We need a new generator. Our current generator, which is original to the plant, is currently at capacity. So we're adding additional electrical draw. So everything we have planned goes back to phosphorus. If you're asking how much is that specific tertiary phosphorus building with our process in it compared to everything else, I can't answer that right now.
right, if I'm trying to go back to, so let's go back to the Lego set. So if we look at, if the building is a Lego set and we are, with this project, we will potentially touch what % of it? Like physically, like all the tanks and the stuff you just mentioned, like how much of, what does that entail? Like what's untouched maybe? I mean, that's the other way to look at it. So what parts of the building aren't you touching? The sidewalks? I mean, I'm just trying to understand.
We're basically not even, the only thing we're not touching is the 56 rotating biological contactors. The anaerobic tank will be constructed next to the primary settling tank, so we won't be touching those. We'll be touching the 4 existing settling tanks. We're going to be doing some improvements to them. The intermediate pump station is being moved. The secondary pump station is being moved. The UV and post-aeration tanks are being completely demolished and rebuilt. So the only things we're not touching are basically the administration building and the 56 RBCs and the 4 primary settling tanks. Everything else, at some point, we're going to touch.
Okay. So I mean, we're getting a better plant out of this. That's fair to
Correct.
say. I mean, if you were a Martian, if you had a twin who was on Mars who knew everything you knew about your field, but you came out to Wallingford and looked at this new plant, or these upgrades. I mean, there is, I'm trying to find the silver lining, I guess.
Correct. And so I think, so basically the plant was commissioned July 1, 1989. So we're basically 2 months short of that. For nearly 30 years, this plant has worked 24/7, 365. We never turn it off.
Right.
So we've had one modest upgrade in 2005 to meet nitrogen requirements. It was a mild upgrade compared to what other communities did. So yes, there are some upgrades, but at the same time, as part of the facility plan, we went through the entire plant, with a comb, looking at what works. Plant is in very good condition. I think that's a really big, huge testament to the operators who are there 7 days a week, keeping it up. Wastewater treatment plant is something you just don't run until it breaks. You're fixing it, in a preventative maintenance.
Thank you. Again, this is just a list. I think this was answered. So the fines would start July 1st.
No, so our new phosphorus deadline is April 1, 2022. Okay. So technically, they really couldn't fine us until April 1, 2022, when the new limits go on board. So the fines would be $25,000 at that time. But what you have to remember is if we take no action, that's basically 3 years from now. We go into a negotiated settlement. We still construct the plant. Construction is running about 2.5% inflation a year. So we've now moved forward 4 years. So that's $10 million on the capital cost of the construction, probably about, another 10% of engineering fees, plus the $25,000 fine, plus everyone's gonna lawyer up.
Which is just what you want, another lawsuit on the PUC. Can you walk me through the timing in general? So when,
Sure.
I know it's in the packet, but I'm just trying to understand, like, when does, ground get broken? Or when do you start going after the gravity well, tank, tertiary thing? I'm sorry, I don't know any of this stuff, so.
Well, before it gets too warm, you're welcome to come down for a tour. I think
I missed the last one.
Yeah,
So
there's
we're
not a
all over
lot,
the-
I don't think there's a lot of requests for a tour in July or August at the wastewater treatment.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So just to give you, we'll go back to, we advertised on May 18th of this year. We had a pre-bid meeting on, that was March 18. We had a pre-bid meeting on March 26. We followed that up with a facility tour on March 28. Our clarification deadline was April 18. That's very important. DEP requirements, when we respond to questions, there have to be a minimum of 5 business days before you can open the bids. Torrington actually violated that. DEP made them rebid their entire project last year. So we are very conscious of that. We finally did open the bids on May 7th at 2 p.m. Standing room only. That was interesting. And again, we were out there about 49 days. The longer you put it out there, you just don't put a price together. There's vendors, there's materials. The secondary settling tanks, the concrete foundation alone is 5 feet thick, so they don't float when they're empty. They're basically gigantic, very expensive bathtubs. So right now, there's 2 parallel tracks going on, and right now we have the town funding ordinance tract. So last Monday, May 13th, we met with the Public Utilities Commission. We're in front of the Town Council tonight, May 22nd. We do have, if it is passed tonight, after mayoral certification, we have to post in the paper, there's a 21-day notice. So that moves us, we basically only have 10 days between when this closes and when we have to execute a contract. Parallel to that, what I've been working on with the design engineer AECom is we have to put in what we call the CFW package, or the Clean Water Funding Packet. Names, contact information, but one of the large things we actually do is we give DEP what we feel our weighted grant percentage should be. Then we sit down, discuss it with them, negotiate with them. They have final determination. I don't want to say it, we have great partners at DEP, but it's a little one-sided. Bill Phelan's seen my spreadsheets. It's 57 pages of 11 by 17 line items. So we're dealing with several thousand line items. Everything gets assigned a grant percentage. We roll it up, we sit down with DEP. So those 2 parallel tracks are going on board because we're not allowed to sign a contract with the contractor until we receive an authorization to award letter from DEP. We can't get that authorization to award letter until the paperwork gets in. So basically, we meet the June 28th deadline. I think everyone takes a big, deep breath. And right now, we are planning a mobilization right around September 1st. We probably won't see large-scale construction until the fall. You just don't turn on a project this size, and we're working on some logistics, laydown areas. They have to bring in trailers, they have to bring in power. We've done a lot of the groundwork already. That was one of the things, that we put specifically in our bid documents. These are your laydown areas. This is where your trailer can go. We've looked at the details throughout. Then it's a 32-month construction period.
That's my next question, yeah.
And then after that, so that is for substantial completion. That's a very important term in civil construction. And then we expect another 60 days after that to be a punch list item. So, we basically walk over and basically create a gigantic honey-do list, for lack of a better phrase, not to be sexist. The big aspect there is we have to be online with our phosphorus by April 1, 2022. Well, you just don't turn it on April 1, 2022. We're going to start it up in the fall, and then really in other communities that already have phosphorus treatment, you turn it on around March 1. So March 1, 2022 is when we hit the big green button.
It's exactly what I was looking for.
Okay.
Thank you for that walkthrough. And then I feel like this also, maybe Councilor Turner kind of covered this, but with just Mayor, the letter that you wrote to the governor referenced the potential increase in prices, $150 for residents, $4,000 for commercial. But that's not based on the full 60. That's assuming what is on page, whatever page it is, but the page which outlines the 19.9 million grant, we hope for the $38 million loan, and then the 2.1 million town cost. I guess I'm trying to ask, what are those numbers based on, those increases in your letter? Because they're not based on the full cost. They're just based on...
No, they're based upon our receiving the state money.
Okay.
The, basically $20 million.
That's... Got it. Okay. Thank you for the...
I just want to, I think everyone is aware, but I want to make clear, there are additional improvements necessary at the wastewater treatment facility, and I think the Public Utilities Commission and staff made that clear, I believe it was last year sometime, when it was identified there was another $30 million project slated for, when was that? 5-10 years from now?
Well, let's get this one in the ground first, then we're going to take it, so it starts in 2024 and it'll take us to about 2032. So we call it phase 2, but within phase 2, there's 7 sub-phases.
So they identified a phase 2, which at that time was identified as $30 million. So it's not like this covers everything that's needed. This is oriented to, as Neil indicated.
Thank you. That's helpful. That was part of my first question too, so I appreciate that info. Yeah, I mean, I think, I know there's a lot of frustration up here around timing and when we could have started this. I'm more worried in general about the future. I'm just worried about, we're looking at a pool, new pool. We don't know how much it'll cost. We have the school system doing facility studies. So I'm just trying to, in my head, reconcile where does all this money come from? We know where it comes from, right? Well, we know where it comes from. So it's just prioritizing. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly. So, Mr. Bose, the town's borrowing the money for the PUC. The money's going to be, the bonds as issued and repaid are going to be repaid by ratepayers.
By the sewer funds, that's correct.
Okay.
Sewer rates.
Mr. Amwick, if you could help me, do you have a perception as to how many households in Wallingford are tied into the system as opposed to how many are not tied into the septic sewer system?
So on a demographic basis, 85% of the residents in Wallingford are connected to the water and or the sewer system. We have approximately 14,500 accounts. We do have some people who are water only, who still have their own septic. We have nearly 1,000 customers who are on their own well, but are connected to our sanitary sewer system. We call those flat rate sewers. So approximately 14,500. Of those, 95% are residential sized meters.
Okay. And another question for you. Remind us, how long have you been sitting in the position you are as director of the water and sewer divisions?
2 years, 11 months, 2 days.
And no one's counting though, right? And of that time, how much of your career here has been spent working on this project?
Basically since February 2017 is when I was handed the reins.
Okay. And before that, we had a gap in leadership in the division, right?
Yeah, so I started June of 16. I did not take over phosphorus until the budget season of the following winter.
Okay. Well, thank you for your work on this. I think of all the things we've talked about, the unfortunate truth is that the road has led us up to this place, and this is the responsible way to deal with what we have in front of us. I don't think anybody sitting either at the the Public Utilities Commission, our commissioners, or anybody up here wants to put the town in a position where we're facing $25,000 a day fines. So at the crossroads we are. And here we go. If there's no more from the council, then Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Fishbein, Laffin,
Yes.
Paterno,
Yes.
Marone,
Yes.
Morgenstein, Shortell,
Yes.
Testa,
Yes.
and Zandri. Chairman Cervoni?
Yes. The motion passes. There being no further business on the agenda, a motion to adjourn is in order.
So moved.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, I declare this meeting adjourned.